My title is Minister for Financial Markets, but also in my portfolio is responsibility for local municipalities in Sweden, but also for public-owned companies. And we have a quite big portfolio of public-owned companies in Sweden. We have roughly 55 of them, and it is by far the biggest business group in Sweden, much bigger than any private business group. And if you should list them on a stock exchange, I think the value should be approximately 70 billion euro. So if you divide that by 9 million Swedes, for instance, you will find per Swede a quite big share. And for an average Swede, this is by far their biggest savings, although they cannot materialize that easy. But in respect, it's a large sum of money for each individual Swede. So it's a big responsibility to have this part of my portfolio. Let me just begin to say that I have been involved in CSR questions for a number of years. I have been in responsibility for a pension fund, a public pension fund, 10 years, between 2000 and 2010. And before that, I was an investment banker. And during that time, during the 90s, I worked in a Swedish investment bank or Nordic investment bank called Alfred Berg, lately merged with the ABN AMRO in Holland. And in this investment bank, there was a small mutual fund company called Banco. And Banco was the first company in Sweden, maybe the first country almost in Europe, that had as a key product a mutual fund, which they called was ethical. And now we're back in the mid of the 90s. And ethical in these days, it was they did not invest anything in products related to alcohol, tobacco, or weapons. I realized then that it was a nice way to make profits as well, because this product attracted people. So it was good in many ways. It was good for the shareholders, but hopefully also good for sustainable questions. That was the beginning of my interest in these kind of questions in the beginning of the 90s. Then roughly at the year 2000, I was responsible, or I took the responsibility for a pension fund in Sweden called AP7. And during this period, we established the norm-based screening method. And that means that we did not say anymore that it's not allowed to invest in tobacco or weapons or alcohol. Now we had a base on the UN, United Nations foundations, that according to the United Nations or the OECD, what is seen upon as sustainable question and what is not. And that could be pollution, it could be discrimination, it could be corruption, or it could be a number of things. And companies involved in these kind of questions should not be allowed in our portfolio. The problem with this method was to define who should be the arbiter, who should be the judge to define which company is to be banned or not. We found a method or a principle that we said, let the UN decide themselves. So we said NGOs with a tight relationship to the United Nations system, they also frequently produces reports where they have name on companies that violate fundamental UN principles. And those companies we'd exclude from our portfolio. But the big thing was that we made this public. We made a name and shame list, which we made public for everybody to see. It was a list primarily of 25, 30 companies. And we were a very small player, the AP7 in Sweden. But since we made this list public, the companies on that list wanted to get off the list as soon as possible. So they came all from the US or from Latin America or from Asia, traveling to Sweden and asked us, tell me, how should we do to get off the list? So I think we found a nice tool to handle these kind of questions. And I'm happy to see that this norm-based screening is now moving ahead, and it's the most frequent way of handling these questions in Europe and maybe in the world right now. So I think the work we did in these years, 10 years ago, has really made change. This is nice, but I want some pictures as well. Okay. Yes, this is what I just told you, and it's roughly 70 billion euro. This is some of the brands that we are handling. We see the brand of the post office, we see the brand of the railway company, we see the brand of Vattenfall, Waterfall, the electricity supplier. We see the brand of Nordea, one of the biggest European banks right now, where we have a share of 13.5%. We have another bank, SBAB, fully owned by the government. We have the pharmacy, for instance. We have export credit company, and we have, for instance, the airline company SAS, which we own together with Norway and Denmark. So it's a big variety of companies. All in all, it's roughly 55 of them, and they have different missions in the Swedish society. This is important. This is the foundation. The government's overall objective is for the companies to generate value and, where applicable, ensure that specially commissioned public service assignments are carried out. I think it's important to declare the foundation, what we are doing. And my predecessor, Mrs. Maud Olofsson, she made it compulsory for all public companies in Sweden to report according to the GRI 2007. This was a very big step, I would say, and I think Sweden was the first country to adopt this among all public companies. It was an important step. And I think it should be mentioned, and I think I will repeat it later on, that to us there is no conflict, there is no trade-off between sustainability and profitability. Quite the opposite. Since we are a long-term holder of our stocks, we can wait for results. And we think in the long term, sustainability is a prerequisite for profitability. That is why this is important. We manage a lot of companies as representatives for the Swedish population, and we should give them as good return as possible. And in doing so, we must emphasize sustainability. Otherwise, we will not at all make our mission the right way. Open and clear communication on sustainability work creates trust in the companies. And I think we have an interesting example of that. In Sweden, we have and in Finland, a telecom company called Telia. Telia has made big achievements and made big success in East Asia, or East Europe and Asia. A lot of these STAN countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and so on. This is dictatorships, all of them. They have been accused for corruption, and there is now investigation that will sort that out. But one thing that is interesting to see, it's the reaction from different interests of the company. When this accusation took place in Sweden, the municipality of Stockholm, the city of Stockholm, said, we have 40,000 contracts with this company, Telia. Now we will conduct a new public tender because we don't want this kind of company or this kind of behavior from our partners. So this was a clear message from the customer. 2 or 3 of the biggest holder of Telia shares, 2 or 3 biggest fund companies from Nordic banks. They said, we will sell out, and they did so. They sold every stock they had in Telia as well. So it was the reaction from the owners. So this was a very nice example that companies that doesn't have order in their sustainability framework, they will have big reaction from customers, from owners, from suppliers, and I also think from employers. If you look at polls among the youth generation, the young generation, and you ask them what is important for you when you will try to find a company to work for, they say, all in all, that it is important that they will have these kind of questions in order regarding sustainability. I think transparency clarifies risks and opportunities and provides stakeholders with insights into the ongoing work and make it possible to follow improvements step by step and better understand the challenges encountered by the companies. And the high standards of company sustainability reports has speeded up this work by increasing transparency. I think something has happened without I'm touching this. Is that true? No? What we're doing right now is that we will take this new step. And the new step is that it's not enough to report by the GRI. The new step is that each of these 55 companies should define sustainability targets that is relevant for their company. And when that is done, they should link that to their business model. They must find a way to make their business in line with sustainability targets. That is, the better the business going, the better it is for the sustainability. And this is a very, very big step. You can imagine, for instance, that an electricity supplier like Vattenfall is quite easy to imagine. You can have more wind power, more solar power. But for a bank, for instance, it might not be that easy. You must think somewhat more. So what we are saying is that find sustainability targets and link them directly to your business model. And the responsibility for this is in the board, of course. Sustainability is by no means a strategic question, and all strategic questions have its natural place in the board. Sustainability cannot be delegated to some kind of an expert far way down in the hierarchy in the company. It must be dealt with in the board, and the board must be skilled and also must have some kind of enthusiasm, I would say, about these questions. Otherwise, we will never get through. So the board has the responsibility to create and find sustainability targets and to link them with the business model. And this could be different, of course, for all kind of company. The owner, that is the state, where I am responsible, and the chairman of the board, we meet frequently. For the biggest companies, I meet them once every quarter, and it's normally to talk about economic targets, developments on the markets, and so on. But from now on, these talks will also, as a compulsory topic, include sustainability targets. And we have said to the companies that during 2013, you have to develop this, and from the first half of 2014, this has to be implemented. Possibly before, but at latest the first half of 2014. Some people have already done this, some companies. I will give you some interesting examples, or two of them. We have an iron ore mine company up north in Sweden, LKAB. It's one of the biggest in Europe, and they have competition with big iron ore companies from Australia and Latin America. LKAB, it's a very old company in Sweden. It is somewhat technical, but they produce small iron bullets, which they call pellets. You can see here. They take up iron ore from the mountain, and in a big factory they produce these iron ore pellets, and this is this in size. When they are doing this do all kind of iron ore companies. There is a lot of carbon dioxide that is needed. Now LKAB has found a method that can decrease the carbon dioxide by more than 50%. I think it's 70% or something like that. Then they have exactly the same characteristics regarding quality as the usual pellets. But these pellets they call green pellets, and that's why you see the green thing coming up for these iron pellets here. These green pellets they sell to their customers for a higher price than normal pellets. It has exactly the same quality standards, but they sell it at a higher price, and they sell a lot. And the reason for that is that the customers want to say to their partners that we take responsibility for the environment, so we buy green pellets from LKAB. So the customer is happy, the LKAB make a lot of profits, which in turn come to the government, and it is good for the environment. So this is a very good example, I think, where you can link sustainability questions into your business model. Another example is the postal office. Some years ago, we had a merger between the Post Sweden and Post Denmark. The Post Nord, as the name is right now, has 40,000 employees. And part of their vision is to be attractive and stimulating workplace with healthy, committed employees. Social responsibility is therefore an obvious priority, and they're focused on teamwork, leadership, and health. Following years of steady improvement, Post Nord sick leave is now down to 5%. And this is an excellent achievement from both a sustainable and an economic perspective. And Post Nord aims to be the environmentally correct choice for its customer, and have set up a long-term goals to reduce its carbon dioxide emissions by 40% between 2009 and 2020. The road ahead. Of course, we are not finished, we are not ready. We must always take new steps. This is the step for the time being. What we do know now is to make sure that the Swedish state-owned companies understand what we mean with this initiative. And this requires, of course, a big number of dialogue and meetings. It's also important for us to involve the private sector, NGOs, and the media. And for instance, in the public-owned companies, in the board that we appoint distinguished people, business people from the private sector. So hopefully this initiative can spread in that respect to the private sector as well. Of course, we want as many as possible to recognize how important it is to work actively with sustainability. And to finish up, Swedish state-owned companies are to set a good example, particularly in terms of sustainable business practices. The younger generation, in particular, is extremely committed to these issues. They want to work for business and do business with companies that strive to use the earth resources responsibly, and they respect human rights. And to survive and to secure long-term value growth, companies are compelled to prioritize sustainability issues. Thank you so much.